I'm under a warm glow. If you're watching the video, it looks like a warm glow because there's a great big heater up there on the wall. I'm back in Oslo and it's just sort of turning autumn, or fall for the Americans out there. So, geez, where are we? I'm late. Well, I'm late. I'm doing the weekly update late. It's a Monday. I'm early because it's 5 a.m. because this is what seems to happen with my head these days. I have trouble sleeping past about 4:30 in the morning. Now, having said that, I do normally get a good 6.5, 7 hours, so it's not all bad news. But yeah, this year sleep has been a bit of a challenge. More on that another time. The joy of this time of day is it is absolutely peaceful here with no noise whatsoever. So I'm back in an Airbnb in Oslo. I've been doing a bunch of events here I'm going to talk about in a moment, and a bunch of events and things coming up as well. So if I'm awake, I might as well use the time productively and do this a little bit earlier than usual. So events. Last week I was at NDC Tech Town in Kongsberg here in Norway. It's about an hour south of Oslo. I did a talk on the Internet of Pwned Things, which was a lot of stuff that I have done in the past. There's a lot of broken IoT stuff. So I did Cloud Pets, the talking teddy bears that you connect to the internet. Like, that was always going to be a bad idea. Incidentally, fun fact on Cloud Pets, they gave, so actually scroll back a second. Remember, the problem with Cloud Pets is that all of the kids' voices and the messages got left up on the internet in an Amazon S3 bucket, albeit with obfuscated URLs, albeit again without any auth on the URLs. So, you kind of had to know what the paths were. But their entire metadata was exposed in a MongoDB, publicly facing to the internet. No password, discovered by multiple people, data deleted, messages about ransoms left there. Fun fact, Showdown logs also showed that after the first person broke in, deleted the data, left a ransom note with the Bitcoin address, 2 other people then came along and changed the Bitcoin address to their own. I still find that an amusing fact. Anyway, so you got enough metadata out there to then locate the voices, because of course the metadata points to the S3 buckets that have the MP3 files in them of the kids' recordings. And these were the devices they gave discounts to military personnel for. So it's like, here, active soldier on duty or whatever, put this in your bed. Okay, maybe they soldiers put it in their kids' bedroom, but you get the point. Listening devices, recorded voices, left them publicly facing, incentivization for military. Anyway, that was Cloud Pets. So I did Cloud Pets. I also spoke about the Nissan Leaf. So this was the EV, the electric vehicle, not the extended validation. We'll come back to that today, don't worry about that. The EV, which someone in my workshop here in Oslo actually a few years ago found a vulnerability in, which exposed certain features that could be controlled via a mobile app, such that they could be controlled by anyone who knew the VIN number of your vehicle. So for example, turning on the climate control. You could do this just by hitting an API. And the funny thing is, actually, when I go through this talk and I show the API requests, the verbs are always really messed up. It's like, here, change the state of this vehicle by making a GET request. And people are like, oh no, you're not meant to use a GET to turn on the air conditioning of the vehicle. And it's like, there's a bigger problem. The bigger problem is I just need your VIN number, which is printed in your windscreen, and I can move things inside your car. Anywho, so there's some talk about that. Scott Helm was involved in that one with me because he had a Nissan Leaf, which made demonstrating the whole thing very easy. That's a lesson in many different things. Bad API design, bad responses by the organisation who just didn't want to take it seriously until it got press. Also bad recovery insofar as when they did actually update the app and push it back out, they managed to leave some copy and pasted code from Stack Overflow which made absolutely no sense and was facing users in the actual UX. And they make cars and they put software in your car. It was just, this is only a few years ago too. This is very recent history. So as that much more recent history from this year, I also talked about TikTok Track. Now, TikTok Track is the kids' tracking watch. This is the one that Ken Munro from Pentest Partners in the UK reached out to me about and said, look, there is probably going to be something terrible about this because so many of these watches have things that are terrible. And then it was insecure direct object references from top to bottom. So in the talk, I show how you could go and retrieve the details of other families. You could get information about where their kids were. You could relocate their kids. You could set some stranger as a, air quotes, parent, and then that, air quotes, parent could make phone calls to the child. So I do actually have a blog post up there detailing it all, including showing one of Ken's mates, one of his colleagues, Vangelis, actually making a call to my little girl because he can do that when he can control who's allowed to call her. freaky stuff. So that was NDC Tech Town in Consberg. Now, I'm going to be doing a bunch of other talks coming up, so I'm going to give a quick overview of what they are. Some of the material I just mentioned will be in those, so if you're coming along to some of those events, you'll get to see the whole thing in hopefully all its glory. This week, I'm actually going to go to Java Zone in Oslo. Obviously Java, not my normal thing, but that'll be running Wednesday and Thursday. If you're around Oslo, I'm going to swing by there. Certainly Thursday morning, my good mate Niall Merrigan will be doing a talk there, so I'm going to go see Niall's talk, because that's always entertaining. And then I'll spend a little bit of time wandering around as well. Now next week, I'm going to talk a little bit in advance, because some people actually need to make plans for the things that they're doing. Next week, I'm going to be spending a bunch of time. Now just to be clear, this is the week of, this week will encompass, where are we, 17, 18, 19 September. I had to think about that. Next week, I'm going to be spending a bunch of time in Denmark. So I'm going to be at the KMD STEAM conference on the 17th of September in Aalborg. Then we're going to be doing a free NDC meetup in Aarhus on the 18th of September. So anyone can come along to that. They are listed on my events section of my blog. So if you're on a normal browser or an iPad or something with a big screen, you'll see that down the right-hand side under upcoming events. Otherwise, go to /2019 events after the troyhunt.com bit, and you'll see links to those and registrations. So, NDC meetup in Aarhus on the 18th. After that, going to Copenhagen. So we're going to do another meetup in Copenhagen on the 19th of September. We're going to be over at Microsoft, where I've done a couple of different talks over the years as well. Fun fact, I did a talk there. Must have been, actually, you know what, I did a talk there on Australia Day last year, the 26th of January. And I remember it was awesome, because when I came to do the talk, they just had Aussie flags everywhere. But I think it was the year before there I did a talk as well. And meetups like this are always good because they're casual. I'm not running a stopwatch. There's loads of question time at the end. And I remember someone at the end said, you know, can you show us the dark web? You know, because it sounds very scary. Can you bring the dark web up on the screen? So yeah, sure, you know, we're going to go to the dark web. We'll go to a dark web marketplace, and it was Dream Market or something like that was around at the time. So I pop open Tor browser bundle, go to Dream Market, and I'm browsing around, and the intention is to show things like stolen data on the internet. Now, if you have been to any one of these online dark web marketplaces, you would have seen some of the stuff there does actually get a bit graphic. And I'm not talking about the drug stuff. The drug stuff I find interesting purely from the observation that here you have data from data breaches sitting alongside like black tar heroin and just really, really nasty stuff. The other thing that is all over dark web marketplaces like this is porn. And unfortunately, I did click a link that I shouldn't have clicked. And that was a very, very big screen above me, and it was the fastest Alt tab I have ever done in the world. So, lesson learned, the other thing that stuck with me is afterwards I was talking to some Danish people, and I was like, oh man, sorry, this was, you know, I probably should have seen this coming. And they're like, well, who cares? It's porn. And I'm like, there are places in the world, Western society places, where if I had done that, the reaction would have been very different. Long story short, I like going to Denmark. People are chilled out. So I'll be in Denmark doing all those things. I'm not going to get into the detail of things after that because that's at least 2 weeks away, but I will be in Hungary, in Budapest, first trip to Budapest, doing the ITBN conference as well. So I'll share more about that as we get closer. It's already listed on my events page. Okay, so long intro there about things that have been happening. Now I do have a few other things here. Facebook. Of course, Facebook's in the news again. So Facebook in the news about these phone numbers. What was the total number? 450 million or something of phone numbers exposed. Let's just, oh no, it was only 419 million, not so bad. 419 million phone numbers. Now, I want to talk about a couple of things here because a bunch of people pinged me on this for two different reasons. So one reason was just general commentary around look how Facebook is stuffed up again. Now, as is my understanding with the way these numbers were obtained, Facebook used to have a feature where you could search for people by phone number. So you could plug in the phone number and then it would come back and it would go, okay, well this is Troy. Would you like to connect with Troy? And it was not even an air quotes feature, it was literally a feature, find someone by phone number. Now, regardless of the privacy implications of that, I can see how that would be a value add as a platform. Now, the problem, of course, is that people enumerated it. And my reading of this story looks like someone, almost Cambridge Analytica style, went through and used a feature that was there by design to do something else and exploited it, i.e. just mass enumerated, I don't know, just kept adding one to the phone number or something, and ultimately has ended up with 419 million of them. So I think one thing to be clear about is that it doesn't look like this was a vulnerability of Facebook or a hack of Facebook, as the headlines often read. It looks like it was an abuse of a feature which has since been deprecated as well. Now, there's a perfectly valid discussion to be had around whether Facebook should have ever had that or whether it was too easy to expose your number without realizing the ramifications or all this sort of stuff. But it wasn't a hack insofar as it took advantage of some vulnerability in the platform. So I think it's just important to be a little bit clear about that. And for the most part, Cambridge Analytica was the same thing. This was APIs that were published in a certain way to do a certain thing. It wasn't like, hey, we added an apostrophe and a 1 equals 1 and we ended up with all the data. It wasn't that. It was abuse of a service which was functioning in the way it was designed to function, just perhaps not intended to be used that particular way. So that's the first bit. Second bit, a bunch of people have said, will you put the phone numbers in Have I Been Pwned? Now, there are several reasons why I won't do that. And the first one is I don't have them. So this looks like it was found by some security researchers here. The security researcher Sanyam Jain. I've probably done a terrible job of that name, so sorry to them for that. Certainly they haven't reached out and said, here's the phone numbers. It's early. Here's the phone numbers. So I don't have the phone numbers. Now, that's the first reason. I can't load what I don't have. Secondly, I'm not sure I really want to go down that path. And there's this sort of bigger discussion that I keep coming back around to, especially in recent times, as I'm still going through this Project Svalbard Have I Been Pwned acquisition process. The big question here is, what data do I want to be searchable? And I guess in many ways, a phone number is not that different to an email address. It's a personally unique identifier. For the most part, people don't have landlines these days, do they? Usually a phone number does specifically identify one individual in the same way as an email address does, even though in the past some people might have shared email addresses. Let's say they're as good as necessary for being personally identifiable. Do I want to have phone numbers? Do I want to have, extending that logic a little bit further, IP addresses, physical addresses? Do I want to be able to either search by it or do I want to store it so that other people can, retrieve those attributes of their personal data after a breach? Now, the thing with things like phone numbers is that the prevalence of them within data breaches is a tiny fraction of the prevalence of email addresses. I'm approaching 8.5 billion records in Have I Been Pwned at the moment where almost everyone had an email address. There was a period of time where I was just loading breaches that had usernames, but it's a very, very small percentage. Like literally we're talking single-digit millions out of 8.5 billion. So the effort involved in terms of extracting them from the data set, the effort then involved, and you might think that sounds trivial, but here's what I mean by this. Here's what I do to extract an email address. I have a regex. It pulls it all out, job done. It's literally a 5-second command. I go and get a cup of coffee. I come back, larger data breaches are already finished. It's pulled them out. Email addresses, I've actually got to parse out that data in whatever delimited format they're in or restore the database and pull them back out. A lot more work. I've then got to store them in some sort of construct. And then do I start to match them? Like, do I build up a profile of people where this email address and this phone number belong to each other? And then do we create the concept of having a more holistic identity? And that's starting to be a big problem as well, because it's one thing just to search for an email address, which is quasi-public anyway. I say quasi-public insofar as you give it out to lots of other people because that's the way you get email. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing to start having richer profiles of people with more personally identifiable data, which could be used in abusive patterns if ever anything went wrong with Have I Been Pwned. So one of the joys of running it the way it is, the worst case scenario is that it's only email addresses that get exposed, at least in terms of data that's come from data breaches. So you start to go down a much more serious path once you add other personally identifiable attributes. Now, this is definitely one of the discussions I've had with organisations as I go through this acquisition process with Have I Been Pwned as well. There is a lot of interesting opportunity to be able to do things like give people more power over their data. There's a lot of privacy risk as well in doing that. And at this point in time, I honestly don't know what sort of balance we're going to land at as I transition into a new organisation. But the point I'm trying to make here is it's not just as trivial as saying, pick up the 419 million phone numbers from Facebook and load them into Have I Been Pwned and make them searchable. It is a much more complex thing than that. All right, so that's that. Now, a couple of other things. Big day tomorrow. So tomorrow will be, based on my clock today, because I'm doing this late, tomorrow will be the 10th of September. 10th of September is the day that Chrome 77 goes stable. Chrome 77 is the first version of Chrome to drop the EV indicator from next to the address bar. Now, I've obviously written a lot about EV and my dislike of the positioning of it. Now, just to be clear, I don't dislike EV itself. I don't have a problem with what it does, so long as, let's say, commercial CAs say, here's what it is, it sits up in the address bar, people might or might not know what it is, it doesn't actually have any impact on phishing, you will pay a lot more money for it, you don't get anything from the warranty, it's going to run for a long time, revocation is broken, so you're going to increase your risk in terms of any private key com. Like, if you position it like that, I go, yeah, sweet, that's fair and accurate. Unfortunately, that's not what usually happens, and you get these bullshit arguments from CAs, commercial CAs, about why EV is actually worth paying money for, which frankly in just about every case it's not, unless you have some sort of regulatory obligation to have it, and then no matter how stupid it is, you've got to do it anyway. All that aside, tomorrow is the day that that's going to drop off Chrome, and then next month it's going to drop off Firefox as well. So this is going to be kind of interesting. I would love for some sort of e-commerce platform out there. If you're responsible for an e-commerce platform, you're listening, here's what I'd really love. Get some stats on shopping cart abandonment. Because this is a lot of what the value proposition is being promoted as. And you see this over and over again. The material that I've shared in many blog posts over the years as well, which again I think is bullshit, but I love the numbers for it, where you'll see messages like, when you have the green address bar and it has the organisation name, the rates of shopping cart abandonment go down. Do they? Because I'm seeing a lot of online e-commerce services actually drop EV and go to DV, which they've done for many years. In fact, quite funnily, and again, this is in some of my blog posts, some of the e-commerce sites which the commercial CAs promote as having EV for quite some time have been running Let's Encrypt certs on DV anyway, so clearly they don't really care about it. I'd just like to see the hard numbers. So we're going to see that hit. I predict that absolutely nothing will happen because people didn't know it was there in the first place, and we're just going to go back to a padlock, which is what DV and OV has had for ages anyway. So I really don't think it's going to have any impact. I will be amused, entertained, curiously watching to see if the messaging of commercial CAs starts to change, because if we now get into this new era where there is no green address bar, there hasn't been, well actually let's quantify, because each different browser behaves differently. So Safari on iOS, September last year, they dropped the organizational name from the address bar, and I believe also Safari on Mojave, they dropped it too. Not a Mac user, so someone can tell me if I'm wrong there. So they dropped that, and just to make things really confusing, when it's an EV certificate, the URL and the padlock is green. When it's a DV certificate or an OV certificate, well then it's like a very dark grey. So there is a visual indicator, but you just no longer have the entity name, so the whole value proposition of EV, which is to recognise the entity, kind of goes out the window. So they made that change ages ago. So no entity name in the address bar. Now Chrome's obviously doing this tomorrow, we've got Firefox doing it next month. How long will commercial CAs continue to promote the entity name in the address bar for? Now maybe they'll take the argument of, it takes people a while to update their browser, therefore we can still say that. Now of course this is an era where certainly on personal installations, Chrome and Firefox update with great regularity. And you would have all seen this before. In the enterprise, all right, maybe they manage desktops and they push out updates on some sort of standard operating environment schedule, and it's going to take a little bit longer. But the point is that if you're a CA and you're out there saying, hey, go and buy my extended validation certificate, because then your customers, your mums and dads and your all normal people who come to your website are going to see a green address bar with an entity name in it, that becomes bullshit. Tomorrow, which it really did in September last year, but it just becomes more bullshit tomorrow, and especially more in October, because every major browser, I'm excluding the minor ones here, you know who you are, every major browser that has large market penetration is no longer going to show it. So that will be curious to see. Let's see how that pans out. Now on the HTTPS thing, I had an interesting thread with someone yesterday, really quite odd, but not unprecedented. And I'll link to it and you can have a read of it and form your own opinions. Here's my opinion. This was a discussion around the adoption of HTTPS making older browsers unable to browse content. Now we've got to sort of put a little bit of shape around just how old we're getting here, and maybe we'll just sort of give a few examples. So in the beginning, when everything was HTTP, and let's say it was HTTP 1.1, we can go back a very long way with browser support. When we start going down the HTTPS path, there are certain things that we've done with HTTPS which has excluded older browsers from being able to use it. So for example, SNI, SSL, so server name indication, which allows us to have multiple different certificates on a single IP address. From recollection, the last major browser and operating system that couldn't use that was Windows XP and IE6, might have been IE7, but you could always run Chrome on XP and it would work. But we're back in the XP era for people that can't use SNI. It's a huge portion of the web today that runs SNI. Now someone could mount the argument, I would like to be able to browse the web with Windows XP, with the original version that shipped with of IE. I think XP shipped way before IE6 too. We're going back some years here. And they could make the argument, I would like that to still work. And this is the argument that I'm hearing, and it's the argument that this discussion descended into here, which is, hypothetically, Windows XP running, let's say IE5, just for kicks. XP running IE5 is a historic version of the internet. We would like to be able to still use that today, because otherwise you're killing the history of the internet. And this is the way this discussion went. We could mount the same argument with things like SSL3. We killed off SSL3 with the poodle bug in late 2014. And when I say killed it off, the likes of Azure, for example, literally turned it off. I remember because it broke a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't my responsibility, but I was there to clean up. So we've gone through time where the adoption of HTTPS, and particularly the progression of stronger versions of SSL and then TLS, have precluded older clients from working with sites that run it. And this argument here, it was very much around, you need to preserve the history. And I fundamentally do not understand well, I do insofar as, maybe it's like digital historian. We need the old things to be able to run because we don't want to sort of lose them forever. And there are a few examples given of really old clients and devices and things like this. PowerPC, for example. How old is PowerPC? Was it early 2000s or late 90s? Those words have not been said for a long time. Let's just agree on that. Now, honestly, who needs to browse the web with PowerPC? Now, you might say, well, it's important to some people, and I'm sure it is, and that 0.001% of the internet, maybe it is important to them. But let's say, for argument's sake, PowerPC could browse sites that run SSL3, but they can't do anything with TLS. So what are we saying? Sites should continue to support SSL3, because if they do, then you run the risk of downgrade attacks, because people in the middle, just trying to keep everyone happy here, someone who gets in the middle of the connection can then downgrade the TLS handshake. You can fall back to SSL3, it's got known vulnerabilities, and everyone's put at risk because a historian wants to be able to run a version of PowerPC. It just doesn't make any practical sense. And this was a robust Twitter discussion, and it sort of got to the point for me where, there are ways of being able to fall back. And as I just mentioned, we could fall back from TLS to SSL3, but then we have downgrade attacks and things like this. So there are ways of doing it, but there are risks that come with it. I end up saying in this discussion, why do you think this doesn't happen? You want to be able to use PowerPC to browse old websites. Why do you think websites don't enable that? And the answer was effectively something along the lines of, well, because the website operators don't want to do it. Now, inevitably, that's a combination of the risk that it puts people at and the cost. So are we going to behold website operators to make every single old version of old clients still compatible with every single new thing they do? Because if it was me running a website, I would get to the point where I'd be looking at it going, okay, let's say we're talking about deprecating TLS 1.0. We're only going to support TLS 1.1 and 1.2. People argue you shouldn't support 1.1, but You get my point. I'd be looking at my traffic stats and I'd be going, okay, well, how many people can't actually work with 1.1 or higher? What slice of my audience am I going to use by killing off 1.0? And if I look at that and it's a sufficiently small number that it justifies A, the security upside for everyone else, and B, I get to save some money because I'm no longer having to support that. Remember back to the old days, particularly as we were killing off Internet Explorer 6 and a lot of whole crappy sort of non-standard HTML. There was a massive support in keeping websites compatible with all the old stuff. And we had polyfills and screwy stuff like that. And eventually we've sort of gradually moved away from that and we can just go, look, screw it, the old stuff just doesn't work anyway. Which is actually another point, because if you are using something that can't do HTML5 or possibly even CSS, like good luck with anything actually working for you at all. So there's simply no good incentive for organisations to remain backwardly compatible beyond a certain point. And I just don't entirely get the argument. A very tangential thing, but very related. I remember one particular user group I did at a point in the world. And I won't say where it is in case the person is listening, because I'm going to chuck them under the bus a bit. But it descended into somewhat of an argument where this person was saying you shouldn't go HTTPS on everything because what if there's, I think the example was something along the lines of, what if there's a bushfire somewhere? Probably just giving away what country I was in. What if there's a bushfire somewhere and someone needs to be able to go on the internet and check the bushfire status, and they're using a browser which can't support HTTPS, and you only serve bushfire statuses over HTTPS, and then the house burns down and they're dead. And it's just the most batshit crazy argument for several reasons. Now, the first reason is that if you're using a browser that can't communicate over HTTPS, you're not actually doing anything. Not on the internet today, not anything of significance. So let's count the ways. You're not doing any banking, you're not doing any shopping, you're not doing any email, you're not doing any social media. You're also not reading the news because every major news outlet these days is now HTTPS as well. I remember it's probably about 18 months to 2 years since I was last able to show sites like CNN doing HTTPS and not HTTP. Ages ago they moved. So you're not actually using the web in any semblance of what we're used to using it today. So you're not browsing or doing any normal stuff. So there's that. The second thing is that everyone these days, and I'm sure people are going to say there's exceptions, let's say most people, just about everyone these days, needs to use the internet in one way or another because so much of our lives are dependent on it. Our lives are dependent on a whole bunch of things, even related to the way we interact with governments. We do a lot of things online. All of that is HTTPS these days. I think there would be a very, very, very tiny slice of the community, particularly in places like Australia or Norway, which are modern Western countries. And I appreciate there's a very different story to be had about other parts of the world where access to devices and modern equipment is a very different story. So again, the context of this was in one of those two countries. It's a very different story there because you do end up with a situation where pretty much everyone has access to internet using a modern enough device, which could still be 5 years old, but a modern enough device to be able to do HTTPS. So I fundamentally don't understand this argument. And there's a very good reason why the web is going so HTTPS on everything. And part of that reason is because there's such a tiny fraction of the audience that can't use it, that frankly in the overall numbers, they don't matter to the organisation. They don't matter enough to go, we're not going to do this because we're going to lose some slice of our revenue that actually matters. That was a bit ranty, wasn't it? I just don't get the argument. Anyway, so that's all of that. Last thing is new sponsor this week. New sponsor this week, the week that's just gone past, but they're also in this coming week, so I'll get to give them another shout out, is Okta. So Okta is a great organisation. Okta has actually done some really cool stuff with me in the past. So they've created a super, super cool extension that uses pwned passwords so that every time you're browsing around the internet and you start to enter a password into a password field, their extension can pick it up. They can do the whole anonymity thing, so they're not sending the password to have it been pwned. They're sending a representation that I can't reverse in any way off to pwned passwords, and they can tell you if your password has been pwned in the past. And the number of times I've had people send me like screen grabs because they've gone to, let's say they've gone to their frequent flyer program, and their frequent flyer program demands that you use a 4-digit PIN. And they put the 4-digit PIN in, and Okta, I think it's, oh man, I'm going to get the name of it wrong. I'll link to the Okta extension. I think it's Pass Protect. They pick up that password, they send it off to Okta. Again, a representation of the password, not the real one. Comes back, it says, hey, it's been seen in a heap of breaches. The extension puts a little modal into the page so it looks really native and says, hey, this password's a bad one. And the number of people that have screen capped that and sent it to me and gone, hey, isn't it great? My airline of choice is now using Pwn password, and they've not realized that they've actually gone and installed that extension because it's just so neatly integrated. So I've done that with Okta in the past. I've got a bunch of friends working for Okta as well. You guys know who you are, so thank you for your support and for connecting me with the people who actually had the advertising budget in Okta. And Okta this week is talking about, I like this line actually, friends don't let friends write their own auth. So start using Okta instead. There's a free trial too. So a big part of what Okta does is the ability to do the auth layer for your app so that you're not in there writing it yourself. And a lot of problems go away when you don't have to write your own auth. Everything from password storage through to password resets, through to 2FA, through to all of these other things that can be rolled into an auth provider like Okta. So go and check them out. They have a free trial. You're going to see them around for most of the rest of this month as well. So I'm going to keep talking about Okta and not writing your own auth. So that's it for this week. Next week, the next update, which if I get back on schedule will be this week, will still be from here. I'll still be here on Friday, but I will be in Denmark as of Monday. And I guess next week I'll come from another country. And then the rest of this month is just going to be different countries before I get back to Australia on a more stable cadence. Thank you very much for watching. I'll come to you from here next week.